Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are a Markham Community Church located in the Greater Toronto Area with a passion for helping you engage in an authentic, life-giving community. We would love to connect with you further. Please take a moment and check out our website, where you can find more information about our ministry. Well, we hope you're blessed by today's message.
Hey, has anyone here ever done anything really crazy just a minute though, to prove your love to someone? Anyone? Anyone done that? I bet you there's some here that would say, I have the best engagement proposal in the history of all time. Some of you here who might say that? Some of you may have done some pretty crazy things to prove your love for someone. But honestly, there is nothing that is crazier. There is nothing that is more dramatic. There is nothing that is more extravagant and literally out of this world than the story of Christmas. It is this story of this relentless pursuit of a God who just loves us so extravagantly. He is so crazy about us that he left heaven to be with us. He left the highest place to step down into humanity to demonstrate a remarkable, extravagant love for people, for you and for me. And I think sometimes this story is so dramatic and so outrageous that it actually eludes us that God might feel this way about us. But you see, if God just wanted to get our beliefs straightened out, he could have sent someone else. If God wanted to just clarify right from wrong, he didn't have to come to do that. If he wanted to overwhelm us with the spectacular, there were many other ways that he could do that better. But I think there's only one reason for God to come himself. I think it's a really good reason, and I think because, as Erwin McManus says, in issues of love, you just can't have someone else stand in for you. So God came down at Christmas. Heaven met earth, and the holy and the human intertwined. But you see, it didn't begin there. This had been happening from the beginning of everything. From the very beginning, God just couldn't stay away. Christmas is only a continuation of the story of God who repeatedly pledged his presence and his love to his people. In the garden with Adam and Eve, through the desert, through pillars of cloud and bushes on fire with Moses. He couldn't bear to let us wander alone. Through the promise to Abraham of being a blessing to all the nations, not just some of them, but all of them. To his promise to Joshua that he would be with him wherever he went. God's heart was and is always toward his people. He wants them to be with him, and he longs for them to know his love. That is his priority. Humanity, people, you and I are God's priority. Jesus, the babe in the manger, coming as the Savior of the world, it wasn't God's spur of the moment, oh, my other plan isn't working, I better do something different idea. It is just simply the next, and I think the best chapter in God's whole big story. When the tabernacle was built, it was God putting stakes in the earth to indicate where his people would go to be in his presence. The entire Old Testament shows that God is always present, often in surprising ways. Throughout history, God sent prophet after prophet. This is prior to the coming of Jesus. He sent prophet after prophet to warn his people, to invite them back into his presence, to beckon them to stop wandering away and giving their heart to things other than himself. And sometimes we read, as we read throughout the Old Testament, sometimes they would turn back. Usually when things got really awful, I think we do the same. But as soon as the blessings came, they'd forget God again. And it was during a particularly dark time in Israel's history, a time when Ahaz the king thought that the people of Jerusalem might be done away with, the whole nation. And it was during this dark time that Isaiah the prophet entered with a promise. And he entered with a sign. And it was a promise of a son who would be God with them. And he said, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. And they waited, and they waited. And Isaiah also said, he will be the wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And this story is the journey of a God who longs to get closer and closer and closer to his people. And this journey ends in a manger, or continues through the manger. Emmanuel, God with us, as close as he could get, right with us, just as Isaiah predicted. Think of it like this. There's a kid lost in a grocery store. I don't know if you've ever had a kid lost in a grocery store, but I know I have. And he gets separated from his mom and his dad. And he starts to panic. And you're scared. You don't know which way to go. So this kid, he runs, right? He runs and he runs and he runs and he looks down every aisle. And he looks down this one particular aisle and he sees a shadow on the floor. And that shadow looks somewhat like his dad. And his heart leaps because there is hope. But which is better? The happiness of seeing the shadow, or the happiness that little guy feels when his dad steps around the corner and it's really him? That's what Christmas is. The replacement of the shadows for the real thing. You see, God came and stepped into our humanity. He didn't come simply into a world out there. People felt like he was a distant God. We still do. But he came to enter the world right here. Every crack, every crevice. Often we feel like God is so distant, and yet he broke through every obstacle. He broke through all the barriers to be with us. Emmanuel. She will give birth to a son, Matthew tells us. They will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Not just God made us, not just God thinks about us, not just God above us, but God with us, where we are, all the time, entering into our humanity. In all other religions, man reaches after God. But in Christianity, God reaches for man. Love moves God to you. Let that just sink in for a minute. Love moves God to you. So let's take a moment and look at this event through some of the characters, and let's look at how intentional God is with every detail. There's nothing random about this. And I'll miss some details. We're just going to take some big pieces. And I thought that a way of doing this would be to use a picture of a nativity scene, but we're going to do just a little aside first, because as I was looking for a beautiful nativity scene, I discovered some really hilarious nativity scenes. And I debated putting this in, but I think it's worth a little bit of a laugh this morning. So let's look through them together. So this is the grumpy nativity scene, and I think this might be how we look many years at Christmas. And then we have the minimalist, the one who has only a few words and very few pictures. And then we have Jesus. Jesus with us. Yes, I like this one. And then we have, and then of course we have the dog one. Of course. But for the cat lovers, we also have the cat nativity scene. We can't forget them, or they'd meow very loud. And then we have, oh yes, this is my favorite. Okay, then we have the one that actually is very useful. It's the one made out of bacon. Okay, because everything is better with bacon. And then I ate baby Jesus. Yes, okay, yeah, that's what happens when you have the one made out of bacon. And then we have, and then we have the hipster one. Oh, yes, the hipster one. See, the sheep is replaced with a cow and a dog, and they're on those, I forget what those are called. I love them. I want one. I want to go on one. My husband won't let me because he just sees a wreck coming. Those are the three wise guys coming to see, and of course, they're taking a selfie. And then we have the one, I think, that might be a little more like what was experienced over 2,000 years ago. Why such a place? Why a manger? Why a barn? Really? A manger was a barn. Why not a palace or maybe the Bethlehem Hilton? But I think it was because the barn is a place so common that it would show us that no place is unsuitable for the presence of God to dwell. Muck, manure, dirt, straw, simple wooden trough. No place could ever be too dark or too dirty, too cold for God's presence. Yes, this was the place where Emmanuel, God with us, came first. He walks right into the muck and the mess of our lives ever since. And then the baby. Why? Why such a name? Jesus. It was chosen by God. Joseph was told this would be his name. Do you know that this was the most common name in that area at that time? It was like the Noah or Aiden or Lucas of our day. Yes, those are the top 3 names of 2017. It was a name so common that no name, no person would ever, ever be forgotten by God. And his appearance, he was a baby. He was a baby. We have a month-old baby here. I greeted his mom as they came in, and she said, he's just so little you can hardly see him. We love babies, but often there's not a ton to distinguish them from maybe another baby. But you see, Jesus didn't come to impress us or intimidate us, but he came to be one of us. And then there's the guest list. When one's child is born, we send out these birth notices, and who do you call first when this baby's born? Well, these parents didn't have anyone to announce it to. They were refugees in this land tonight. And so the angels announced it. Kind of cool, right? Wouldn't that be cool? That's the coolest thing. But to who? To who? Do you know who they announced it to? Yeah, the shepherds. The shepherds. That's who was in the guest list that night. Roughly 4 shepherds and 175 sheep. But you see, shepherds, they weren't just simple people, but they were despised people. They were the lowest of the low, really, because they were not capable of fulfilling the religious law. All the rules and regulations, the hand washing and that. No, they were looking after sheep. There was no opportunity in the shepherds for self-righteousness. There was no opportunity for pretense in their hearts. And that's why I believe they heard the message first and announced it to everyone. These were visitors so common that nobody would be exempt. Emmanuel, God with us. And then the parents. Mary, a Jewish peasant girl who was barely beyond puberty in a culture where age and wisdom were the standard of respect. And Joseph, a poor carpenter, a nobody. These parents, they were not kings or queens. They were not religious leaders. But you know what? They get to have dinner with Jesus every night. Pretty cool. But the fate of this world rested on 2 rural teenagers, people so common that no one is ever too common to be with God. But beyond this, because of who the parents were, what would the reputation of this child be? After all, they weren't married. What was God doing? Would they be social outcasts? God, why are you setting this child in the world as an illegitimate child, apparently? Why? Why would God choose to come like this, that shame might be cast on God's own life among us? I thought about this week. And I wonder if perhaps it's because we often wonder about our own legitimacy. We wonder if we are a mistake. We wonder if we're really wanted by people or by God. We fear being the outcast. God with us. Jesus first. There is nobody. Here's what this scene tells us. There is nobody outside the circle of Emmanuel. Nobody unworthy or unacceptable or without access to this relentless gift of God. Jesus with us. Emmanuel. Our soul's worth is not through our own doing, but it's because of God's great love as a babe in the manger. Our bruised and broken parts, our reputation, our image, our purpose, our past has the opportunity and possibility of healing and wholeness because witness breaks brokenness. Witness heals brokenness. Jesus, God with us. But you know what I love is that he doesn't bully us, or he doesn't push us around. He doesn't force us to come. He just beckons and he invites. Because God is so much more interested in an intimate relationship with you than he is interested in proving that he is God. He has already gone big. He is the creator God of the entire universe. That's the spectacular. Now, as a babe in the manger, he is going intimate. And he comes vulnerable because he knows the only way to intimacy with you is through vulnerability. What's more vulnerable than a fragile baby in a manger? So as Anne Voskamp says, God throws open the door of this world and enters as a baby because he wants unimaginable intimacy with you. What do you do when love pursues you? We respond differently. Some of us run right to it and we embrace it. And we just can't believe that we're invited into this. But some resist it. They move just as far the other way as love comes to them. They just simply dig their heels in the ground and resist it. Some just sit back and look from afar. Don't come too close, because it just might get you. And then I think there are some who discount themselves and sit way outside the circle. This past week, I met with a really dear young woman who I've mentored for years. She and I meet occasionally, still, although she lives out in the West End. And she asked to meet because she said, there's just something really hard I'm working through, and I don't know how to get through it. And as we talked, I said, can you somehow explain this to me in a picture? Because I know that this is a good way for her to express herself. And she said, I know cognitively that God loves me. I know. But I feel like everybody else is in this beautiful tent of God's presence, and I'm sitting on the outside, and I don't know how to get in. And she said, my head knows it. And I looked at her and I said, I know it does, because you invite so many people to enter that tent. You're relentless with that. And she said, yeah, I am. But I don't know how to get inside that tent myself. I wonder if that's you. Here's what I suggested to her. I said, I said two things. First of all, just sit with God. Envision yourself outside that tent and listen to what God will beckon for you to draw you inside. I said, there's some things that he has for you as you just meet with him and be with him. And then I said to her, what would you tell other people? What are you telling those that you're beckoning towards that tent? Would you say those same things to yourself and believe them for you? Because you're worthy. It's not about what you've done. It's not about where you've been. It's not about yesteryear. It's about now. And God inviting you into that sacred place. So that's God's priority, to be with us. But if we believe that that's God's priority, here's the next step. Then we are to be with each other. That draws God's presence into our midst. Again, Anne Voskamp so beautifully says that when we make space for someone, when we make space to simply be with them, we become a womb for God. Whew. This womb is this sacred protective space where we are nourished and where we grow, where we breathe and we heal, where we gain our strength and just be with God, with each other. And we gain our strength so that we can survive the elements of the real world. Because again, witness breaks brokenness. Witness heals brokenness. This witness is our vision for life here at the Bridge. It's our vision of grouping. To be with, to be wombs of God that birth this beautiful newness in each of us. Walks with us through those hard parts that we can survive the elements of this real world. I searched and searched for words to explain this witness to you. But my mind kept going back to this story I read about 5 years ago. And I kept leaving it out, and then I kept bringing it back. And so I'm going to share this story with you. From an author that you will not be surprised. I think I've learned more from Bob Goff about being with people and loving people than anybody else. And this is the first chapter in his book, and instrumental to his life from then on. And here's what he says. This is his story. When I was in high school, I met a guy named Randy. I asked around and found out Randy didn't even go to the high school. He just hung out. I had heard about guys like that, and I figured like I should keep my distance, so I did. Later, I heard that Randy was a Christian and worked with an outfit called Young Life. Randy never offered me a ride on his motorcycle, which I coveted, but he tried to engage me in discussion about Jesus. I kept him at arm's length, but that didn't seem to chill his interest in finding out who I was and what I was about. I was a lousy student. He's a lawyer now, keep in mind. Everybody should be encouraged here. I was a lousy student and found out I could take a test to get a certificate that was the equivalent to a high school diploma. I couldn't figure out how to sign up for the test, though, which on reflection was a pretty good indicator that I should stay in high school. But my plan was to move to Yosemite and spend my days climbing the massive granite cliffs. And so, at the beginning of my junior year in high school, I decided it was time. I had a down vest, 2 red bandanas, a pair of rock climbing shoes, $75, and a VW Bug. I'd find work in the valley and spend my off time in the mountains. More out of courtesy than anything, I swung by Randy's house first thing on a Sunday morning to say goodbye and to let him know I was leaving. I knocked on the door, and after a long couple of minutes, Randy answered. He was groggy and bedheaded, and I had obviously woken him. I gave him the rundown on what I was doing. "You're leaving soon?" he asked when I'd finished. "Yeah, right now, actually," I said as I straightened my back and barreled my chest to show I meant business. Randy kept his earnest and concerned face, but he didn't say a word. Then he said, "Hey, Bob, would you wait here for a second while I check something out?" No sweat, Randy. I had nothing but time now. What'd I care? Randy disappeared for a few minutes into the house while I stood awkwardly on his porch with my hands in my pockets. When he came back to the door, he had a tattered backpack hanging over his shoulder by one frayed strap and a sleeping bag under his other arm. He was focused and direct. All he said was, "Bob, I'm with you." Something in his words rang right through me. He didn't lecture me about how I was blowing it and throwing opportunities away by leaving high school. He didn't tell me I was a fool and that my idea would fall off the tracks on the way to the launch pad. He didn't tell me I would surely crater even if I did briefly lift off. He was resolute, unequivocal, and had no agenda. He was with me. Sure, I said kind of half-heartedly. You sure? Yeah, that's right. I can find my way back after we get there and you get settled in. I'm not sure why I accepted Randy's generous self-invitation. I guess it's because it caught me totally off guard. No one had expressed an interest in me like that before. And with that, Randy closed the door to his little house. We walked side by side to my VW Bug. He plopped into the passenger seat and threw his stuff on top of mine on the back seat. The first morning, Randy and I dusted off the stiffness that comes with tent camping and went to the Camp Curry Company cafeteria. I thought I could get a job flipping pancakes in the mornings, which would leave the rest of the day to climb. I finished the job application in front of the manager, handed it to him, and he gave it right back, sternly shaking his head. He didn't even pretend to be interested. No matter, undaunted, I went to one of the rock climbing outfitters with a storefront in the valley. I told them I'd do whatever they needed. I was sure that what I lacked in experience, I could make up for by what I lacked in maturity or raw intelligence. They said that they didn't have any work for me either, and that jobs were tight, almost impossible to get in the valley. I walked out of the store discouraged and looked at Randy. Randy, who was leaning against the VW, but rather than feeding my discouragement or saying, "I told you so," Randy fed my soul with words of truth and perspective. "Bob, you can do this thing if you want. You have the stuff it takes to pull it off. These guys don't know what they're missing. Let's try a few more places." And then, just like he had said the day before on his porch, Randy reiterated his statement. "Either way, Bob, I'm with you." His words gave me tremendous comfort. I applied at nearly every business in the valley and struck out every time. There were simply no jobs available. It felt like the shop owners had quietly met somewhere when they learned that I was arriving in the valley and were conspiring against me to dash my dreams. The same rocks I'd come to climb were now beginning to look like barricades. I applied at the remaining small storefronts. Do I even need to waste my breath to tell you what happened? I only had a few bucks left after buying gas, and Randy offered to spring for dinner. As we walked back out to the car after eating, I turned to Randy and said, "You know, Randy, you've been great coming with me and everything, but it looks like I'm striking out. I think what I'll do is head back and finish up high school." After a short pause, Randy said again what had become a comfort to me throughout the trip. "Man, whatever you decide, just know that either way, I'm with you, Bob." Randy had been with me, and I could tell that he was with me in spirit as much as with his presence. He was committed to me, and he believed in me. I wasn't a project. I was his friend. I wondered if maybe all Christians operated this way. I didn't think so because most of them I'd met up with until that time were kind of wimpy, seemed to have more opinions about what or who they were against than who they were for. Without much more discussion, Randy and I exchanged a silent look and a nod, which meant we were done. This trip was coming to an end. Without a word spoken, I hopped in the driver's seat of the car. Randy hopped in the passenger seat. We followed the path cast from the long shadows the day before. We didn't talk much as we left Yosemite, or for much of the way home, for that matter. A dream of mine had just checked into hospice, and Randy was sensitive enough to know I needed some margin to think. We drove for 5 or 6 hours. Every once in a while, Randy would check on me in his confident and upbeat voice. "Hey, how you doing, Bob?" Why did Randy do this? Why did Randy love me this way? He saw the need, and he did something about it. He didn't just say he was for me or with me. He was actually present with me. What I learned from Randy changed my view permanently about what it meant to have a friendship with Jesus. I learned that faith isn't about knowing all of the right stuff or obeying a list of rules. It's something more. It's something more costly because it involves being present and making a sacrifice. Perhaps that's why Jesus is sometimes called Emmanuel, God with us. So what would it take this year to be present in this sacred, protective place, to feel the breath and presence of a holy God that wants your attention, and then to share that presence by being with each other? What would it take? I know what it would take for me. And I'm going to suggest and just share that with you. 3 changes in how we might make our way through this Christmas season and celebrate in maybe a new way. For me, it's 3 things. Slow down, simplify, and focus. Slow down. Yeah, I'm a fast-paced person. I like lots on the go. And I think I multitask really well. But Pastor Brian shared something with us as a staff a couple of weeks ago. And it was this, that we slow down so that our soul catches up with our life. I think more than any other time of the year, our life just tramples over our soul. So what about if we schedule fewer things in a day or a week or maybe for the whole month? We don't try to do it all. Maybe you won't make it to every side of your family this year. Maybe you won't drive so many miles on Christmas Day. I remember about 4 years ago, my son Lowell and his wife drew a line in the sand. Well, no, he drew the line, and she eventually came around. And he said, "Christmas is ruined for me when I have to rush to my mom and dad's for breakfast. And then I have to drive an hour and a half to your parents for dinner. And it comes to the end of the day, and I'm just done and haven't felt anything." And so that was, for me, a slowing down. That was for them, us slowing down and making some choices to not do everything. And then simplify. Simplify. Let's minimize the complexities. Wow. We just went through a weekend in our family of incredible complexity because my daughter-in-law's mom died last week. And so we had a funeral yesterday, and my daughter arrived with my 2 grandchildren that I see 2 or 3 times a year on Friday. And I want to do everything. And I'm preparing to preach today. But I just had to simplify. I had to know I couldn't do everything, but what is something that I could do? We all have the ability to say no. We can respectfully decide how we're going to spend our days, and maybe it's less food. Maybe it's simpler food and more time around the table. Maybe it's gifts wrapped without ribbons or bows. I love wrapping presents. I love the way they look. I love giving someone a beautifully wrapped present. But what is my present without my presence? It's nothing. So let's be present, not perfect. And then focus and refocus and focus and refocus on being with God, being with each other. You see, the being with is always the gift. It's not the doing for or the giving to. It would be a great loss in our lives to receive perfectly wrapped gifts, but nobody's love and nobody's attention. What if we spent Christmas fully present, not in every moment, but in the significant moments? What if we focused on that? What if it's turning off our cell phones so that we don't get the 2017 family picture like this? I think we have it. Do we? No, I wish you could see it. The family picture with there we go. God didn't send a text message. He sent a person. I remember a Christmas a few years ago where the hustle and the rush were particularly evident. I love everything about Christmas, everything, including the food and including the decorations and including the gifts. And I love buying gifts for people, and I love the lights because I just love light, and God came to be the light in our darkness. Love the sparkle. But that year at the close of Christmas Day, I realized that I had missed out totally. I'd been in the stores, I'd been in the malls, I'd been in church, I'd been in the kitchen. But I had not been with my family and my friends, or with anybody who needed me. I had created a space with them, for them, which is important in itself. And I think everyone went home full and satisfied, but I went to bed feeling rather empty. I had done for and I'd given to, but I hadn't been with. And I felt the lack. Drew a line in the sand that night and made a determination to change how things looked. So what about if we take 20 minutes each day, if we commit to this, 10 minutes of space and stillness and silence just to be with God. 10 minutes for someone else, but really be with them. What if that was the place we started? My prayer for you this Christmas is this. The band's going to come. We're going to close with a song. My prayer for you this Christmas is this, that we would know the unexplainable gift of God, Jesus, Emmanuel, with you, for you, not because of anything you have done, but because of his extraordinary love for you. And then we would break through every barrier to be with him and to share him with others by simply being with. Let's pray.